Shabbat Shalom. As we approach the holiday of Shavuot, I want to share with you a teaching from a wonderful essay written by someone who visited our community only a few months ago, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. The essay can be found in the Koren Shavuot Machzor, the introduction, so I commend it to you when you have more time, but I will give you a portion of it this morning that I want to share with you. And it is the very interesting possibility or understanding that originally we understand the holiday of Shavuot as a holiday that commemorates the giving of the Torah. And it is described in the Bible as a harvest festival, a holiday in which we bring forward the first fruits. And Rabbi Sacks speculates that the holiday at its core and original may have been a holiday to celebrate the entrance of the Jewish people into the land of Israel. And he makes the argument in the following way. He says, look, if you think about the different pilgrimage festivals, Passover celebrates the leaving from Egypt, and Sukkot commemorates the time of the Jewish people in the desert as we are sustained for 40 years in booths. And it would make sense, it would almost not make sense for there not to be a holiday that commemorates our arrival into the land. The land really is at the center of the story of the Torah. We are promised the land. Abraham is promised the land in the beginning of, in the middle of the book of Genesis. The slavery is foretold. Exodus describes the slavery and the exodus from the land of Egypt. Leviticus, the people are at Mount Sinai, and the laws that are given essentially are laws not only for the serving of God in the Mishkan, eventually in the temple, but also for the creation of a moral and just society to be lived in the land. Ben Midbar traces our journey through the desert to the land, and Devarim Moshe recalls that, and we end the Torah and then go back to the beginning, but in the book of Joshua, things kick off, and we live in the land. He makes another interesting observation that the pilgrimage festivals each have their own type of bread. Passover has what? Matzah, which is the bread of affliction. The bread of the land of Egypt, the bread of affliction. Sukkot has its bread as well. What is the bread that is associated with the time of the people dwelling in the desert? The manna, the bread from heaven. And we may not notice it, but Shavuot also has bread. Not blintzes. We'll talk about that later. There are 2 loaves of bread that are brought forth as part of the sacrifices on Shavuot. And the 2 loaves of bread are brought forth because now the people are eating the bread of the land of Israel. In fact, in the book of Joshua, we read that the people enter the land and celebrate Passover. And in chapter 5, verse 11, we read, on the day after the Passover offering, on that very day, they ate of the produce of the country, unleavened bread and parched grain. On that same day, when they ate of the produce of the land, the manna ceased. The Israelites got no more manna. That year they ate of the yield of the land of Canaan. So the arrival into the land And by the way, the counting of the Omer starts on the very day that the manna ceases. The people make the transition in their diet when the manna ceases and when they begin to eat of the fruit of the land and the harvest of the land. And we know this passage from the Passover Haggadah, but it actually comes from the holiday of Shavuot. When we make this historical declaration, we bring forward our first fruits in a basket, and we make the historical declaration, and it reads as follows. My father was a wandering Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there, but there he became a great and populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. He brought us to this place. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And that is the reason that I now bring the first fruits of the soil which you, Adonai, have given to me. So the declaration that we make on Shavuot is a declaration of gratitude for having been brought to the land, and we bring forth the products of the land. So it is possible that this theme, or that the holiday, he also, by the way, even mentions the idea, although the rabbis view the verse, V'achalta v'savata uverachta et Adonai Elohecha al ha'aretz ha'dava asher natan lach, we're going to sing that later, Kakatu v'achalta v'savata, and you shall eat and you shall be satisfied and give blessing to Adonai your God for the land which he has given you. The rabbis learn from that the requirement for Birkat HaMazon, for saying a blessing after meal, he raises the possibility that in its context that blessing may not have referred to Birkat HaMazon, it may have referred to the holiday of Shavuot. That we eat and are satisfied, and we give blessing for the land. Two other ideas. One of them, there are strange customs associated with the holiday of Shavuot. It was mentioned before, the eating of dairy. There are not exactly great reasons behind why we do that in terms of halakha. And he posits the idea that maybe this custom of eating dairy on the holiday of Shavuot comes from the fact that the land is described many, many times in the Torah and in the Bible as Eretz Zavat Chalav Udevash, as a land flowing with milk and honey. And on a holiday, when we're celebrating the land, the arrival into the land, that we celebrate the arrival into the land with the produce of the land, with the milk and the honey of the land. And we don't do that here, although I invite anybody who would like to. In future years, there is a custom of decorating the synagogue in foliage, in plants and other flowers and other such things. And that may reflect the essence of the holiday being a connection to the land. So, a couple of questions. Number one, well, how did it end up being a holiday that commemorates the giving of the Torah? And the short answer to that is exile. We don't have discussions of the holiday of Shavuot being a holiday that commemorates the giving of the Torah prior to the first exile in 586 BCE. And really, it's not until the second exile, the destruction of the temple, that it fully makes its way into rabbinic tradition as Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of the Torah. And why does exile do that? Because you can't have a holiday that celebrates arriving to the land if you're not in the land. And so you find yourself in exile, and you're not going to let the holiday pass by. But the rabbis really effect an extraordinary reversal where they take the prospect that the land comes first and then the law comes second. The law comes in order to create a society for living in the land. And they say, no, actually, the law came first and the land came second. And so they insert into Jewish tradition the primacy of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And when I say insert into that, you remember that passage that I read you from Deuteronomy when it says God put, we were in bondage and then we came out and then we bring forward these fruits? If that's a short version of Jewish history, there's something very important missing. Mount Sinai. In that version of history, there's no description of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And so the rabbis in this way transform the holiday from one that focuses on the land to one in which we celebrate the covenant and the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. The second, last thing that I want to do is to just pose a question. We have the land. We live in amazing times when the Jewish people have a state of Israel. And it is an important thing to ask, so what does that mean for how we should celebrate the holiday of Shavuot? And I want you to know that the early Zionists who were not religious and yet wanted their settling of the land and their living in the land to reflect some of the traditions of the Bible, intuited this connection of Shavuot to the land because they turned the holiday of Shavuot not to a focus on Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah, which they were frankly uninterested in, but actually to a celebration of the land. And so they intuited something that may have been at the origins of the holiday itself. One might make an argument, as they did, that Shavuot should be transformed and not be about Torah anymore and be only about the land. But I disagree. I think it should be both. I think that the holiday can be one in which we celebrate the giving of the land, but also celebrate the Torah that we have. The state of Israel, the land of Israel, does not represent an assurance, but it does represent an opportunity, a possibility to sanctify God's presence in the public square beyond the private recesses of our soul. An opportunity, a possibility, a challenge that we haven't had in 2,000 years. And so we can celebrate not with a sense of triumphalism, but with a sense of a deeper challenge than we have had before. And holding both things, holding the blessing and the gift of the land, and holding the blessing and the gift of Torah together. Shabbat Shalom.